What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with WorkToGame, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the initial impressions and early opinions that I expect to come out of Shadowbringers. As we just have days to go, we got an email from Ethan, a member of the workforce, and so I do want to thank you. It was a very well-written, much longer email than I'm going to have time to totally dive into, but basically the end consensus is, hey, I'm having some fears about what they're doing with the homogenization of the classes. It's something that Bryan and I have talked a lot about lately. And as we go into the initial content, I just wanted to talk briefly about like what early opinions mean, what it's going to mean when something feels good as we play to 80, when something feels good as we get into the first trial, when something feels good as we get into the first Savage, or if some of that does not feel good, especially if you've made a class over several expansions. And so you're not somebody who can just say, you know what, I like Bard and I like Machinist, and so as long as one of them's good, I can just jump back and forth, because there is a chance that your class ends up feeling good or not feeling good, and the other 16 classes in the game are like, well, not really something that affects me. And so we don't necessarily always do a good enough job empathizing with somebody who loses what they feel like is their identity and their piece of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, thankfully, the developers have always done a good job of making sure that groups are viable with any class present. So every 8-man can have one of any class in the game and still clear the content. But that doesn't mean that that's the optimal group. And so there are going to be, sometimes it's like, oh, well, if you're going to bring these two, then you really have to have X, Y, and Z to make this viable, or you just have to be that much better or that much better geared or whatever. And so they have some concerns about Bard, about how we've kind of, the physical range DPS in general feels like that role, I guess we're going to call it, has experienced a lot of change. Dancer being added, Machinist getting a massive overhaul, and then them changing their view on what class synergy should look like in group play has resulted in Bard getting a change. And so if you're a physical ranged player, your 14 experience has been taken into the dev team, and they've just shaken it up and they're just spilling it out. And because we don't have things like PTRs, A, they don't have that much feedback from us yet, and B, we don't really have any context. And so the little bit of changes they've shown us, we put it in the context of Stormblood, and we're like, oh my gosh, that hurts my head. What is that going to look like? And we get really nervous, rightfully so. I mean, we have limited information. It's easy to let kind of fear creep in. And until we get the content, we don't know, and the dev team doesn't know what the community is going to think about these changes. The one thing I would take in as a consolation there is that they've done a very good job of responding in the past. And so if we get into, 5.0 to 5.1, it looks like maybe physical range is a little bit off. Okay, they start maybe thinking about some changes behind closed doors. We get into 5.1. Now we're in our first raid. So now I've seen 8-man content, 24-man content. Awesome. We definitely think there's changes. Then it wouldn't shock me to see physical range to get balance changes in 5.2, assuming that there's something wrong with them on launch. But it's not going to be instant. It's not going to be overnight, because they're going to want more data. The leveling experience is only going to tell them so much. The first trial is only going to tell them so much. The first Savage is only, and then there's the time of, okay, we've learned, now we've got to take it back and we've got to develop it and balance it and all that. So there's a gap, even from the time that we tell them our feedback, there's a gap until that gets put in our hands, that development time, which could easily be a whole patch cycle. So they also talk about Paladins. You guys know that I do have some initial concerns, some skepticism around some of the tank changes that I want to find out that I was just worrying over nothing, but we don't know yet. And so Paladins losing Flash and things like this, as we start to homogenize, right? So we give a gap closer to them. Now everybody has a gap closer. Everybody has. And once you make it to where everybody has the same toolkit, what makes a class unique? Dark Knights seem to be changing and seem to be headed that way. And people are saying that they're not sure if Gunbreaker has its own thing, but we only have so much on Gunbreaker. We've seen it in level 73 content. We've seen it in some base 8-man content. We've seen it in a target dummy. And we have an idea of what the skills look like, at least as of the April 30th build. So the potencies could adjust, which does adjust the rotations. And we know that there's no way they went all the way through the media tour and didn't say, okay, that's interesting to see people do this, because I do hear that, I think it was Summoner or Scholar or something, that it looks like it worked one way at the April 30th build and it worked a different way at E3, that they kind of closed up something that maybe they didn't intend to work a certain way. So Healers obviously went through some pretty major changes as well. Overall, you see them homogenizing the roles just a little bit. But I want to say, like, it's a pendulum. So first of all, let's just calm down and understand we may not like all spots on the pendulum, but on one side we have class homogenization, right? A perfectly balanced game where you literally call tanks tanks. There are no paladins, warriors, dark knights, just all tanks are tanks, all healers are healers, all DPS are DPS. And so that is a perfectly balanced world, and every group comp is identical. And so you know the content has been scaled and adjusted perfectly, and everything plays and everything's wonderful. But that's really boring because all the tanks are identical. You know, they even lost their names in this example. We just called them all tanks. On this side, we have class identity. And class identity it's an incredibly unique feeling thing. Mine feels like just mine. And so you go in and you design all these classes people talk about. Oh, it'd be easy. You make a blue mage look like this. You make a beastmaster look like this. And you literally develop, I play a game called Warhammer 40,000, and the codexes, the rule books for the individual armies, are written by different teams. And so they go off into their own little secret chamber and they write their things, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the context of the other armies. And so you end up with this game where armies can end up massively out of balance until they kind of tune them with FAQs in the context of everybody else. And so imagine if we take our jobs and the paladin, dev is in charge of paladin, doesn't talk to anybody else. They just go off and they just build their perfect paladin. But then you end up with inherently content where maybe paladin is the only viable tank or warrior is the only viable tank, because there's this massive difference in their skill gap, just in how they play. So what we want is somewhere in between, right? We definitely want some of that. That's what makes playing the class that feels right to us feel like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's so cool that I get to be that thing. I get to cast those abilities. I get to play in that way, that I bring that unique utility to a group, that I have a different experience than when I play on a different job. The other side of things is I want content to be clearable with my friends. I don't want my friends saying, yeah, I'm a bard. And you're like, ugh, we don't really want to bring a bard. Like, you're a cool guy and all, just not really looking for a bard because, they're garbage right now. And so you don't want that. You don't want to isolate people and say, oh, you've been playing on a main for 3 years and right now you're the bottom of the meta. And so I can't even let you in my group. I couldn't carry you if I wanted to. And so the truth, like the implementation that we get is somewhere in between. And it's a constant adjustment, right? They try to get it balanced and, oh my gosh, we pushed it too far to this side. And they try to build in some class identity and we push it back to the other side. And you see this done with a couple of different things. You see it done with role actions. That's changed drastically over the years. You see it done with the way limit breaks are broken up. You see it done, so that we can kind of at least section them off into their roles so that physical ranged is different than melee is different than tanks is different. And then you see it done through gearing. I mean, that's a portion of the identity, right? So if there's a unique gearing set to somebody, so a lot of times the weapons and stuff, it does feel like part of your identity, right? It feels like part of that aesthetic, what you're watching, all the animations and things. And then you see it done through unique utilities, so individual buffs they have, individual cooldowns they have, or something that performs a unique task within a group. The fact that some jobs have reses and some jobs don't, really makes that job feel like, oh my gosh, I have this task, I have this role. And it's not that res is part of an identity. It's not that one ability, we talked a little bit about this with, I think Harry put it really well on our last podcast. The individual ability is not the point. So if they remove res from red mage, that doesn't inherently mean that red mage isn't red mage, but red mage is supposed to be this like ranged jumping into melee, like very fast feeling. They have like almost a pendulum within their rotation, and then they have the ability to help out with healing. And so there's just this overall, like, I'm all over the place. I'm doing what I want to do. The pacing feels good. And so, removing one of those abilities doesn't necessarily break red mage, as long as that pacing and that utility still feels the same. So I think to kind of get to the point here, because this is really just an opinion. It's just something I just want to have the discussion about people that are concerned that content's going to be broken when we get in it here. Give it time. Give it time. If the game feels amazing on launch, and when you hit level 80, it feels incredible, that could change. It could get worse. If the game does not feel good, that could get better. Those things could get better because the content adjusts over time. Those things could get better because they actually balance the classes over time. Those things could get better because gearing changes over time. There are times that a certain class doesn't feel good, and then they adjust the ratios of the stats, and they can adjust the gear. And as you get into higher gearing, maybe White Mage doesn't feel good until you have a certain amount of mana regen, and then you're like, oh, this makes total sense. And that mana regen is going to be tied to gear now, right? Because our total amount of mana is fixed. And it could also just be, well, let's just adjust the potencies on White Mage. Okay, well, let's just adjust the way content functions so that White Mages perform differently in it. Okay, and so all three of those would change the White Mage experience, and they could do none of those. They could do all three of those. They could do any combination. So just as an example, like there just isn't any reason to freak out. Between 5.0 and 5.1, there is so much content to do that class balance, in my opinion, is A, very fluid, so I would try to keep an open mind, and B, the game's going to be fun without it. Like, to a certain degree, obviously it can't just be totally broken, but to a certain degree, the game is just going to be fun because it has a lot of content. The game is just, and 5.1 looks just as loaded. So I would say for the first 6 months of this expansion, of this 2-year cycle that we're about to embark on, we are going to have a lot to do. And so if there's something that you don't like, if you don't like the new fate changes, if you don't like the way the dungeons play, if you don't like the way your class plays, hopefully there's enough other things going on that this game is very enjoyable while the devs probably work on whatever it is that doesn't feel good to you. They do listen. We know that. Bryan and I have concerns about the longevity of this game, and a lot of that has to do with when you hear things like, we wanted to do something, but we couldn't because of technical limitations. It's like, okay, well, how long can you keep letting technical limitations strangle this game until it starts to cause outward problems? I have that concern. I have that fear that we're going to get down the road and they're going to have something constrained by 10-year-old code, by 20-year-old code. And if they've never done anything to adjust that, it's like, just how much can you let the code limit what the designers want to do before it starts to feel like watered down content? So we have that concern, but that is a concern for way down the road. That is just Bryan and I looking down and saying, I don't know, I don't want a balloon payment on my mortgage, right? That's so far down. In the meantime, Shadowbringers looks incredible. They have listened to so much and they have fixed so much of the things that over Stormblood we said we wanted more of. It looks like they're giving us more open world content after we've been asking for it. It looks like they've listened to a lot of people's issues with the way certain jobs played, and they're trying something new. That doesn't mean it'll be perfect, but I appreciate the effort. So this is overall just me saying, guys, let's just chill out. Let's just go into Shadowbringers with an open mind and just be excited to play new content when there's going to be so many people in that there's a wait list to get on the server because they literally can't. The game could have double the players it did 60 days ago. And it's just awesome to go into cities and be around all these people that are all going through the same experience you are. And I really hope that people can find joy in it, even if it's not perfect on launch. It doesn't have to be perfect to be an incredible experience. This game has so much to offer that I think it is the best MMO to play in 2019, even if there are flaws when it drops on Shadowbringers. It is so far above and beyond what I'm seeing in other MMOs right now that in my personal opinion, it doesn't matter if one or two of those things doesn't work. It doesn't matter if one or two of those things needs to be adjusted over the first patch cycle or the first 2 patch cycles. And I trust that if it does need to be adjusted, they're going to do that adjustment. These aren't a set of devs that are just going to drop it on 5.0 and say, hey, we pre-rolled 5.1 for this date and 5.2 for this date. We're out. We're going on vacation. No, they are working for this community and they are going to continue working for this community. And I have that confidence that Yoshi P and his team are going to continue giving us incredible things. So I would just keep an open mind. Hopefully this is just a positive reminder to go in and don't expect the game to be perfect, but enjoy the incredible amount that probably is pretty freaking good. And let's go enjoy Shadowbringers. There's no reason to try to find the 6 negative things on Shadowbringers and make that your priority focus. Should we be aware of them? Yes. Should we voice them so that they can start working on them? Yes. Will you see Bryan and I probably put up the few critiques we have on this channel Yes, but that will be among guides that talk about how excited we are about individual classes, about how excited we are about the new fates, how excited we are about any new dungeons that are just really feel good. There were a couple dungeons in Stormblood that I just really thought were the best dungeons for 4-man content that they had put out, or at least in that top list. I really enjoyed some of the Stormblood dungeons personally. I enjoyed a lot of our raids. I enjoyed several of our trials. Especially when they went outside their shell. Like Rathalos, in my opinion, was just a game changer in showing what they can do with 8-mans. So I'm really excited to see what they do with Shadowbringers, and I don't expect it to be perfect, but I do expect to have a lot of fun, and that's enough reason for me to be excited to play. So hopefully this kind of helps people say, you know what, I have some concerns, I want to document them, I want to get them up on the forums, but I'm going to wait and see context. I'm going to wait and see, does the content make the class feel good, even though I feel like they took away abilities that I thought were core to their identity, even though they took away something that I thought was incredibly important to what I loved about this job. I'm willing to wait and see. I'm willing to say, you know what, even if that pendulum shifted a little more towards that homogenization, overall what I gained, overall what they were able to do with the content, what they were able to do with Savage, what they were able to do with, all these different, everything from 4-man to 8-man to 24-man content, I think it was worth it, right? I had to pay to push the pendulum a little more, right? We want it dead center. It's never dead center. It went a little to the one side for me, but that's okay, because in trade for that, all these other things came out and they all worked great. And so I think that's a worthwhile thing. And overall, the game is simply incredible. That's what we're looking for. So my name is Chris with WorkToGame. I know this was just a long discussion, opinion piece going into Shadowbringers about should your initial review be the final review? It's why MMOs are really hard to review on sites like IGN or Kotaku or Polygon or whatever. When they put out an opinion piece on launch or a review on launch and they say, we're going to give it a score, these are living, breathing games. They're constantly changing. They're changing because the way us players play. They're changing because of what the devs introduce as far as content. They're changing because of balance changes. They're changing because of gearing. They're changing because player skill levels adjust. We get better at playing certain jobs, and so certain content just gets easier because the player skill as a whole, I think, is a lot higher than it was years ago. And so there's a constant change here that says, you know what, something may not work on day one, but any one of those things may make that very same piece of content something that we cherish after a certain amount of time has passed. So I don't think that the most important thing is to focus on what it's like day one. It's to say, okay, where are we at and where do we go from here? And as long as the game is continuing to seek improvement, is this a game I want to continue to support? Is this a game I want to continue to give the amount of time that games like this demand? So thank you guys so much for hanging out. Enjoy Shadowbringers, please. This has been a long wait. So enjoy the initial serving, take it at your pace, enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it. And then if after one content cycle you need a break or something, this is a game that's very easy to come and go from. I don't think that's going to be how Bryan and I enjoy it. I think it's going to be pretty constant for at least the foreseeable future. But whatever gives you joy in gaming is what you should be doing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Sup, guys?
Nice shirt.
Oh, man.
You think I could get one like that?
Well, you can get definitely a shirt like this. You can check out the Red Mage right here. This is a limited run shirt, and we actually have more limited run shirts right now. This month, we're focusing in on Dragoon. Other months, who knows? So it depends on when you see this video, what the shirt of the month would be. The link is definitely in the description, Chris. So if you want to go, support the channel and actually get something cool to wear and rep the channel, all the more power to you.
I just might do that.
Awesome.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Buy a shirt.